So I told you to stay away from me, away from me.
Evening everyone, welcome to the second Tubecast episode. I'm here with Fletchur, our permanent guest from X22.
Episode 2!
Episode 2. So, coming up today, we got some news for you. A couple of hip stories going around. We got some just as hip bands and releases coming up. We got some gigs in local Brighton area to talk about. And I conducted an interview with a legendary producer, Pete Smith. He's worked with some fantastic names, but some more on that later. Fletch, do you want to say some words?
I just want to say, mate, how proud I am that you've made it to episode 2.
Thank you. Yeah. I really wasn't sure we'd get this far.
I mean, there's no build-up, you've just dropped it, and, the world's going crazy, so it's great, yeah.
I mean, that is very far cry, but we haven't got cancelled yet, so let's take that as a plus.
So, new Rick and Morty episode dropped this week.
It was fantastic. Sorry, it's not music related at all, but great show.
But every time Rick and Morty drop an episode, so will we.
Yeah.
No, we'll probably do it more.
We should try and get a brand deal with some Rick and Morty merch to give up. Anyway, on to the interview. Good evening, afternoon or morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harvey from Tubeman Productions, and today I have a fantastic guest with me who's worked with some star-spangled names. He's a legendary producer, Pete Smith. He's worked for the likes of Stevie Wonder, Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, and he's kindly come on here to answer some questions for us. So, do you want to say hi, Pete?
Hi, how you doing?
Oh, fantastic. So we'll just jump right into it.
Yep.
Between the 80s and now, with the changes of analog and digital, because most of the start of your career was around purely analog. How do you feel about the shift from analog to digital these days? Is it progression, or do you think it's people getting lazy?
No, I think technology is always going to progress. Trying to do things that on analog. When you were trying to replace sounds, or if you were trying to replace a chorus or move a verse or move a backing vocal, was a very, very long and arduous process. Pro Tools in any digital format, it's a much easier thing to do. The problem is with that, I think that the young producers of today, that they have a little bit too much choice, and they tend to not make their decisions early because they have the options to always make them later and later and later. So then I think that actually they give themselves more to do when it comes to mixing.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a lazy thing. I think technology moves on. Digital recording was always going to happen, and I use it. I use it all the time. I'm not one of these guys that goes on waving his flag about analog is better and all that. Analog is different. A lot harder to work. Sounds different. Don't know whether you go it sounds better. It sounds worse, because I know some analog records that sound absolutely terrible.
Do you have a sort of preferred format, or do you sort of chop and change between the two depending on the project?
You get what you're given. You go into a studio and you've got a Pro Tools HD. That's what you use. So
do you have a regular studio that you work with these days?
No, not really. Not really. There's a studio that I use in Copenhagen quite a bit, that I have that I work with a songwriting partner in that studio. It's quite a big studio. I use that. I mean, in Berlin, I work in 2 or 3 studios in Berlin. There's one in Brighton that I work in. No, I don't really. No, I've never been particular.
Okay. Is there anyone just out of interest in these studios that you're working with that particularly stands out to you?
Are you talking about as an engineer or as an act?
As an act from an engineer's perspective. Someone that might be easy to work with, or has something distinct or unique.
I mean, as the producer, you create the atmosphere in the room, and if there is someone that's not into what you're doing, or doesn't agree with what you're doing, or is not in step with you as far as attitude is concerned, then changing that person is an option.
Okay.
But generally, most of the people that I work with have learnt that to be an engineer or to be a producer, you have to have an amazing amount of patience and always keep a smile on your face if you can.
Also, from from the sort of artist perspective, it must make your job a lot easier if people are cooperative, up for offering ideas as well as accepting new ones.
Cooperative artists, I think that's an oxymoron.
Well, I mean, you get the odd few.
Look, artists have their different traits and there's different stuff. Sometimes, if you're really in step with an artist, you agree with each other.
Okay.
I'm not there to tell an artist what to do. I'm there to ask an artist what to do.
Yeah.
And because the reason for me being there is to make their product better, not to make it not. But it has to sound like they want it to sound. I know. You're going to probably ask, which a lot of people ask, do you have a definitive sound? No, my definitive sound is what the artist wants to sound like.
Okay. So would you say that with what the artist wants, do you have sort of techniques of getting it out of them if they're a bit unsure of what they want?
I mean, artists are generally unsure of what they want, but sometimes so are producers. You have to be able, you have to be capable of producing the artist's ideas onto a recording medium, whether it's tape or whether it's digital.
Speaking of tape, do you have any experience with tape-to-tape recording? Because
when you say tape-to-tape, you're talking about 24-track to 2-track? What are you talking about?
Like reel-to-reel? Because sort of asking, because I read a story the other day of David Gilmour when they were writing Money. They were sort of just jamming around, and he took the bass track tape and was listening to it and just cut off the last beat at the end, and that took it from a 4/4 pattern to into 7/8. And I just thought the idea of recording with just strands of tape and like piecing them together like like old movie cassettes. I was just wondering if you have any experience with that.
Yeah, I when I was a youngster and working in sort of big recording studios, we used to cut tape all the time.
Oh,
that was part of your job.
Okay.
It's just analog editing, so it's the same thing as digital editing, but much more dangerous. You make a mistake, there it is.
Project gone.
End of. Yeah. So generally, if it was a big edit and it was something that we were a little bit nervous about, we'd do a copy first.
Okay.
Right, and then so we'd make sure we covered ourselves.
So anyone listening, take notes. So does your regarding equipment you use, do you have sort of a handy bag you keep with you?
I have to say, there were times when I'd carry Neve preamps around with me and Neve 3038 EQs and pulsate compressor but in the end, to tell the honest truth, travelling from city to city with all that stuff became a bit of a bind for me, and I always swore that I wouldn't have my own home studio, because it was always exciting for me to go to other studios and listen to other rooms and listen to other control rooms, studio areas. It was the greatest thing. I know lots of guys that love to work within the box in their bedroom, and it works brilliantly, and they make great records. But that's not what I do.
So, in terms of what you do with going to these different studios, do you feel that keeps it exciting and keeps it fresh for you? Does it?
It does. There are sometimes where I don't want to make a record for a year. I just don't want to make one. As you know, I do a bit of teaching and I do some lecturing at colleges and I do various master classes and stuff. And I just keep away from the studio. I don't want to be there. So the next time I generally go in and record something, I get excited about it.
These days, do you find yourself going into one genre, or do you sort of
one genre?
Or do you just sort of dip in between artists and
no,
genres?
Slow, quiet music.
Slow, quiet. Okay.
I think it might have something to do with my age. I think I made enough quick, loud ones that I just get to that stage now where that's what I listen to, whether it be country, whether it be R&B, whether it be singer-songwriter. I'm just sort of into that form of listening now, and they're the kind of records that I like to make.
Okay, awesome. So going into your your history a little bit, could you maybe tell us a little bit about the artists you worked with?
Well, I did. When I started at a studio called Utopia, which was in North London, in Camden Town, and I was very fortunate that it was a really good quality studio, and there was a lot of bands that came through there, and I remember the first thing I ever worked on as an assistant engineer was a song called "I Don't Like Mondays" by the Boomtown Rats, and Bob Geldof was the lead singer in the band. It went to number one, you know, and
what year was this, sorry?
81, I think.
Okay.
And it might have been 80, but it was early. The fact that it went to number one had nothing whatsoever to do with me. You know, I was just the assistant engineer. I run the tape machines and all that, but all the skill came from the producer and the band and all that sort of stuff. But it was an amazing experience for me. It was an amazing learning curve. Then I went to work as an assistant engineer and an engineer with bands like Spandau Ballet and Landscape. Did some mixing for Duran Duran. Was lucky enough to work with Stevie Wonder when he was working with a band called Wonder Love.
That's incredible.
As an engineer, and you know, and watched him work. All during that time, I was picking up stuff.
Would you say there was, back in these early days, was there a definitive sort of turning point or a crucial lesson that tipped things in the right direction for you?
I think it's when they threw me in the studio and I wasn't quite ready, you know.
Okay.
And so it's like sink or swim, and you make some mistakes, and you pay for them, but that's also a learning curve. Yeah, throwing me in at the deep end, I think was a good one. I was very lucky because I became the chief engineer at that particular studio because I was bringing in good quality work. Yeah, I think the definitive moment was when Sting asked to do the demos for the last Police album, which was the Synchronicity album, and you know, and he asked for me.
Oh wow! So was this? I believe I read you were initially. Did you studio engineer before you produced, or was it the other?
No,
for
I was
Sting?
a studio engineer.
So when you were studio engineering, were you in the room when they first played Every Step?
I was the first person to hear it.
Oh, incredible!
In the world, I think. Yeah, I heard. Yeah, he played it to me. It was a demo.
Did it feel like a hit back then, or was it?
Did when he put the vocal on, yeah.
Wicked.
Yeah,
Nice.
I think he knew too. He said that should do it.
Okay.
That was his comment.
So what was it like being in the room with those guys? Did you ever hang out outside? of the studio,
Stuart and Andy weren't there. It was just Sting.
Okay.
It was just me and Sting in a room, and we would program, you know, some sort of Lin machine together, and then he would play a bass line and a guitar line and get me to do some overdubs. And the last thing he would do was put the melody on.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
But yes, anything that happened outside of this in the studio? Was it just professional?
Oh no, we were we were quite good mates, and you know we did some things together. Then I obviously then went and made his first solo record with him, Dream of Blue Turtles, which was a lot of fun. And you know he rang me up out of the blue and said to me, would you like to engineer co-produce my first record with me? And you know, obviously I was extremely flattered, but I'd heard that Quincy Jones had been approached for it, and I said, well, you know, and I did say to him, I approached Quincy Jones, and he went, no, it was too expensive. I went, okay, and we laughed about it. It was just too expensive.
Do you still keep in contact with any Sting or anyone from the Police these days?
Only if I want tickets.
Fair enough. So yeah, now how do you feel about remixes these days?
Great. There's some good ones and bad ones. I feel about any. I've just heard something that a remix of a track that I did with Sting in '86, and I didn't like it at all. But I've heard other stuff that he's remixed of mine that with another remix team, and I've liked it.
What do you think you would have liked to have heard from the remix that wasn't the one you said you weren't too favourable with?
Yeah, I don't think it's any of my business really.
Okay.
You hear it, it's remixed. It's so subjective music, and if Sting's happy with it, he's the artist, his song.
100%, yeah. So, has there ever been a time you've been sitting in the car and then you've heard a track pop up that you've produced on? Have you ever been sort of like, wish I hadn't done that there?
Well, most of them, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah, most of them. Oh, that's too loud. Oh, why isn't the bass drum loud enough? Oh my God, the bass is not loud enough. But you know what? By that time, you're sort of past it.
Yeah, it's already
done. You've done it, and if it's on the radio, it's obviously quite popular. So that you're more pleased about that than the problems that you think you might have had with the mix.
Okay. So, in the spirit of sort of avoiding our listeners, producers specifically, making too many tracks that they dislike too much, is there anything you can sort of suggest early in their career to maybe a skill that they might not think about to cover?
Embrace spontaneity. Embrace it. Things don't have to be thought about too deeply. This is only music, right? We're not building coal mines here. This is not engineering. This is only music, and a lot of great music happens spontaneously. I found that some of the best vocals I've ever made with anyone, they might be slightly out of tune here and there, but they're really spontaneous and they've got a lot of life in them. By the time you've got them to sing the 7th time, the life has gone out of it, even though it might be in tune. Use auto-tune so you can't hear it unless you're doing it purposely so you can hear it. I can still listen to records that have been affected on purpose if that's the aim. But when someone is singing so out of tune that it has to be fixed, that always throws me. I'd rather listen to something that's slightly out of tune.
You could argue that it's sort of adds that, like you were saying, spontaneity. It's the human element. It's not meant to be there, but it's, there's a reason everyone loved the Sex Pistols. It's because
all over the place.
They're all over the place.
So were the Clash.
Emotion.
All over the place.
I saw this picture pop up the other day. I'll show you the one that stood out most now.
Yeah, it looks about right. That's Epstein. No, it doesn't. No, it's not. Yeah,
that's
McCartney.
For the listeners, it's McCartney talking to a reporter. Reporter asks, "Do you see your father often?" And Paul replies, "No, we're just good friends."
McCartney and Lennon were very funny. They were really funny. Well, especially Lennon, to tell the honest truth. He was on the line. I don't think he liked being interviewed very much, John Lennon, but he was very funny when he was.
I can imagine the frequency that they're getting interviews. They must be tired.
By the time it comes to the 10th one of the day, they must have been knackered.
Yeah, exactly. So now sort of coming up to wraps with the time for the interview now.
Okay.
So just wanted to close off. Might be a bit of a broad question.
Go on.
Favourite album to have ever been produced?
I think my favourite sounding record of all time was probably the Norah Jones's first record. If you look at engineering supremacy, I thought it was an amazing sounding.
Was that the name of the album?
It was I think it was called Norah Jones. Yeah.
Oh, just Norah Jones.
Yeah, it was her first record. I mean, there's 10. There's 10 that I can tell. Sgt. Pepper's going to be one of them. Pet Sounds is going to be one of them. I think the first Pistols album. You go back to Ricky Lee Jones's first record, which I thought was an amazing record. Led Zeppelin 4. You can just go, and they're all different sort of genres. I have to mention the Who.
Of course.
Quadrophenia, what a record!
Oh, fantastic!
What a record! And you just go, how did they do this? So it can change from day to day, but there's so many more that the White Album by the Beatles. When you listen to that, you go, blimey, how have they done that?
Do you prefer, also just to round this one off, do you prefer the sound of innovation or just a nice sound? Like, albums like Revolver and the White Album that really push the boundaries of what you can put onto a bit of wax. Or do you prefer just a nice mix that sounds pleasant that you can just
push the boundaries all the time. Even some of the modern the R&B stuff and all that, when they're pushing boundaries with distortion and stuff, I love it if you hear something that's slightly different. Blandness is blandness, but if you've got a great song, blandness doesn't matter in the production. A lot of songs nowadays, or a lot of 3-minute periods, are great production.
I guess availability of what's there, the equipment.
And how many songs can you write? Over 30 years before chords.
Yeah, that's why most of the time you've got at least 4 people on an Ed Sheeran track, or 6 or 7 on a Beyonce tune.
But when Ed Sheeran does, plays Wembley on his own with an acoustic guitar, it's quality, isn't it?
It is. Well,
you just go, well done, mate. Well done. You've got 100,000 people here, and you're playing acoustic guitar. Them.
The people that naysay to that, I'm sure that's more than they've done.
What are you thinking? What are you thinking? Having a go at Ed Sheeran?
Yeah,
what are you possibly thinking?
He's pushing. He's
pushing the boundaries with an acoustic guitar and 100,000 people. That you don't need a synthesizer to do that.
All you need is work ethic and guitar.
Great songs. To be able to write a great song, which he can do, and I think because sometimes because of the whole technology thing, people are getting lazy in their writing because they're getting more experimental in their production, and I think every now and then it shifts back.
But once if you get out of the thinking less of I'm just going to write a song that I can put loads really in-depth production stuff. People focus on the song first, and then think, right, this is the song, this is the vibe. What can we do now that it's recorded?
That makes it better, yeah. And both work. Both work.
No right or wrong.
No right or wrong. No, don't judge either of it.
Awesome. Well, Pete, thank you so much for taking the time
That's
to
all right.
come and talk to us. You've been a pleasure. We hope we've been just as good for you.
Yep, it's been good fun.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Was he a lad then?
He was a lad. Yeah, he was a lad. Very intimidating weight. I don't know why, but just the waiting was more intimidating than actually meeting him. He was a nice dude. He had a lot to say, even before and after recording. Yeah, it was fantastic talking to him.
Do you think did he give you any sort of like? Did he give you any stories that you couldn't put on the recording that we can potentially talk about now?
Sadly, no, nothing really interesting. There are a few just odd editing bits that a couple of ums and errors here and there, but that's about all we had to take out.
The Pete Smith stories, it's really cool, and it just sort of enforces, I think, for particularly people, students like us, studying music. You gotta fucking work for it. You gotta work for it.
Do.
And I know, I hope he doesn't take this the wrong way, but Pete definitely had a head start, I guess, with his dad being so involved in the music industry himself. He was a trombonist, was he? Saxophonist, was he? He was
I
a
believe
musician,
one or
wasn't he?
two. We need someone in for fact checking for these stuff.
Yeah.
It's
He was a
info there or
musician. He was definitely a musician. But yeah, if you're not in the right place at the right time, you work to put yourself in the right place at the right time, and then after that, I mean, I've been in studio with producers and just watched them just head down for hours and hours, days at a time. It's a different type of motivation to produce an artist, to produce an album.
I think one of my favourite producers I've ever witnessed was Blackrock Studios down by Brighton Marina. I remember going there for an audition for a prog band. As we were sort of leaving, the guy had been mixing a band while we'd been rehearsing that day, and we'd sort of popped our head in his office to say goodbye. And he had his head down. You could kind of see he was bopping his head up and down. So I don't think he was unconscious, but just sort of head bopping onto a bottle of wine, not really drinking from it or anything, just listening to what I assume listening, and just chilling with this wine.
Listening to the wine?
No, he was listening to the music around, but had the wine, and we would give the oh bye mate, but sort of nothing, no response from him whatsoever.
Yeah, in the zone. Yeah, different type of person to do it. But,
exactly. So now we're gonna take a minute to talk about some gigs that we're really interested in the local Brighton area. Fletch, would you like to do the
I'll
honours?
run with this. Alright, so there is a band, a Brighton/Worthing based band that's quite close to my heart. They're a bit of a ska punk band, like No Effects, just with less trumpets, really, I guess, or trumpet singular.
Nice.
They're called Dr. Gonzo. They are dropping their debut album this month, and next month. Their launch is on the 15th of December, which I know is the Sunday. It's a Sunday. Down in Bar 42 in Worthing. So, 2 reasons you need to go there. First of all, because it's local music, and Dr. Gonzo are a heaps good punk band, and there needs to be more punk in Brighton, Worthing, this sort of area. A second reason, Bar 42 is a sick bar, sick music venue as well. You can park there as well. This is crazy. It's the biggest difference between Worthing and Brighton. Worthing being this tiny little wannabe Brighton, but you can park there, so you can go to gigs and you can park there and not have to worry about parking. Which is Brighton is the biggest downfall of Brighton. So December the 15th, Dr. Gonzo, their album launch. Get to bloody Bar 42 in Worthing if you're down here.
Awesome, thanks for that, Fletch. So I would like to mention our boys Band the Disco. They've got their 10th birthday coming up. They've just started sort of drip feeding out the lineup, which I'm very excited about. We've got local band Swan Meat. They've been creating a bit of a buzz with a self-titled EP that they brought out a short while ago. They've been played on BBC Intro and Radio 6 and had lots of good praise from publications in the UK. Very, very loud. For reference, they're sort of like an Idlesy cabbage kind of band. I'm super excited for that. They've also got Polite Bureau on that gig. They're a psychedelic inspired post-punk group, sort of opening the night, getting it started. It's their first ever gig, So, coming down, give them some support. Similar to sort of, for sort of reference, Nice Biscuit, Blood Red Shoes, and the Fat White Family. So, Fletch, as for releases, anything in the airwaves?
I'm going international on this, mate. I'm going freaking international.
Let's go for it.
There is a Welsh band from Swansea called Neon. They have released the first single from their album. It's streaming now. Have a listen to it on Bandcamp.
How do you spell Neon?
K-N-E-E-O-N. Never heard of them before. Obviously, being Welsh myself, I'm ashamed of this, but I got onto them today. Really good sort of like garage punk band, coming out of Swansea as well, so definitely get onto those guys. Can I just talk about quickly as well?
Yeah, of course.
Going overseas now, a bit further. Best band name I've ever heard in my life as well. It's called Pacoo, Pacoo, Pacoo. And I assume you have to say it like that, like lasers, like Pacoo, Pacoo, Pacoo. But Pacoo, Pacoo, Pacoo. Canadian punk rock, pop punk band, heading to Brighton, Feb 12th, playing at the Prince Albert. So it was a couple of months away, but it's I'll mention it again closer to date, but Pacoo, Pacoo, Pacoo.
With that name, how can you not buy a ticket?
Exactly. These guys are actually signed to Big Scary Monsters, which are an indie label here in the UK, a really cool label. So yeah, they've got releases out. They come in Feb 12th.
Be there.
Beat it.
Before February the 12th, Tubeman Productions have their own gig on February the 4th at Green Door Store. That'll be... It's sort of a charity showcase evening. We've got hoping to get involved with the Pebble Trust for it. They're a local charity that aim to help fund young people with disabilities, getting access to music and access to instruments. So that we've got Credentials. They're a local punk band. The singer wears a luchador mask. Check them out. My darlings, the Frogs in Yellow Lace. They'll be doing their bits there, and also Hastings indie band TDK. They'll be opening the night.
Conflict of interest, everything you've just said.
Well, just because I'm involved with these people and helping organise the night doesn't mean I can't plug it.
Well, before you move on, bro, can I go overseas a bit even further?
Yeah, by all means.
Can I just keep going?
Yeah, just keep going.
Scanning the planet.
Honestly, please.
We're
Go
off
to
to
North
Australia
Korea.
now, everyone, and we're sticking on the pop punk vibe. I was so pleased to hear a couple of weeks back to find out that it's one of the best pop punk bands I've ever come across in my entire life, from sort of like the early ooze, have just reformed and are playing a ton of shows in Australia. If you're in Australia, you lucky dogs, I'm pretty sure they're all sold out, but Seraph's Cole. Shout out to Seraph's Cole for finally coming back together. These guys are very close to my heart as well, as their vocalist plays drums.
Okay.
So as a kid, watching these guys has been like, I was really getting into these music. Unfortunately, by the time I'd moved to Australia, these guys had split up.
Who do these guys sort of sound like? For just a reference.
Like all the good pop punk from like the early ooze. So I mean, their earlier stuff is like it's more sort of like Frenzal Rom punk. Even like No Effects punk, but yeah, poppier and poppier as their album come out, and I've No Use for a Name I'd put them up there with. So yeah, really good Aussie band. I'm just checking now, and they've got 5 dates coming up between January and March all around Australia. They're all sold out by the looks of it. So if you got one of those tickets, good on you. Thank you for coming back, Seraph's Call. Everybody, go have a listen now. If you're into pop punk, you will not be disappointed.
Awesome, Fletch. Thanks so much for that. So we're just going to take a quick hot minute now to play the track of a band we really like. This is Yellow Lace with Stay Away.
So you creeping, so I told you to stay away from me, away from me. Found those photographs, so I told you to stay away, please, stay away, please. Heard you breathing, so stay away, please. I'm begging on my knees.
really love any elements. But I was just saying to Harvey, rather like the one thing that you gotta see it live. Like it's one thing to have a listen to it. It's isolating that, like seeing it live.
The emotion, the energies, you gotta be there, which you can do. February 4th at Green Door. So anyway, enough of that. Let's talk about the news. What's been going on in the world today? The past couple of weeks, Fletch.
Well, I've got today I found out that Miley Cyrus and I share a birthday, so that was pleasant to learn of.
Lovely stuff.
I've only learned of this now in my ripe old age of
21 of
28, yeah. So that was nice, and guys, I just wanted to talk out, and this is more like a shout out as well at the same time, to sort of like anyone who wants to work in the music industry, anyone who's thinking about going into studying music, and all the people in your life that might tell you that there's better routes to go, or like just question why you would want to be involved in the music industry. I know I had it personally when I moved down here to Brighton to start studying at BIM. I remember my next door neighbour saying to me as I was packing up my car, "Why are you studying music? Why do music? Who do you think you're going to be? Like the next Led Zeppelin?" Like those are his exact words. Like my response to that is, "Well, yeah, basically." Like
I think people these days have like such outdated views on what music industry actually encapsulates, because it's not just you pick up a guitar, play a few songs and hope you get somewhere. Like there's so much you can do with it. Sometimes it might start from just picking up a guitar, but then you might piddle about with the action and the intonation and think, oh, actually guitar teching's pretty fun, I might go down this rabbit hole a bit. Or you might enjoy the putting gigs together and booking bands for gigs that you just love to see, so you become a promoter. Like it's not just sex and drugs and rock and roll, it's it's what you make of it.
My college course before uni was just dismal music, dismal numbers. Like no one, and I don't know what it is in our society. We're beating down this industry, or we just assume there's nothing to be. What I've read this morning is the value of this is from CMU, so CompleteMusicUpdate.com. So UK Music has valued the industry here in the UK at £5.2 billion.
Jesus Christ.
And that's up from 4.5 billion last year. So to anyone who says to you that there's no future in music, yeah, they've no idea what they're talking about. There's no move on, keep chasing the dream, because there's a lot of money there.
Is there anything else in this article that you might want to talk about? Because it seems really interesting. Like, does it say where this money's coming from, or
it basically just breaks down that 5.2 billion. So it's saying between creators versus producers and labels, just where it's sort of how it sort of splits out. But no, I mean, I don't really want to go into like reading between the lines of this entire article. My whole point was to anyone out there who is having second thoughts about jumping into the music industry, like this, because of money or because people are giving you sort of like negative feedback. It's your life, you only have one of them, and there's definitely money in the music industry. It says here in this title.
And if you're on the right kind of track and do what you want to be doing, money's going to come at some point, and and if it's not, then there's ways of getting it until it does.
5 is a fiver, mate, and a blowjob only a couple of minutes.
So yeah, a story I'd really like to talk about is recent developments in the US regarding AM and FM radio stations. So for those who don't know, currently AM and FM stations do not have to pay out royalties to artists or labels, but there is a sort of a motion being passed in Washington, well, trying to be passed in Washington at the minute, called the Ask Musicians for Music, or AM/FM, which is sort of a revamped version of last year's Fair Play Fair Pay scheme, which some might remember. The US copyright law is weird in that it doesn't provide a full performing right for sound recordings. So AM and FM stations pay the royalties to the songwriters and publishers, to PPL performers and labels. There's no money coming out from them. A digital performance right does exist as part of the sound performing copyright, so that online and satellite or DAB stations do have to pay, and that's normally collected through a society called Sound Exchange. The industry's been trying to get broadcasting rights for sound recordings for decades. It was decided not to include radio in these royalties in last year's Music Modernisation Act for fear of, souring the deal with radio stations, because I'm assuming, negotiations with it are quite tense at the minute. Radio supporters earlier this year backed the Local Radio Freedom Act, which the CMU called an entirely pointless piece of proposed legislation which would basically seek to help copyright law stay exactly as it is, so it's a change nothing act. It's been welcomed by trade groups, interestingly, and by Sound Exchange. So obviously these are the guys that are profiting. They're not gonna. A couple of quotes that also came with this article that were quite interesting. From Democrat Gerald Nadler in the House of Representatives. She said, "The United States is an outliner in the world for not requiring broadcast radio to pay artists when playing their music, while requiring satellite and internet radio to pay. It's unfair to both artists and music providers." She goes on to say she's proud to sponsor for the AM/FM Act, give artists and copyright owners make a choice to allow AM and FM to use their work for free or seek compensation for it. I'm not sure what the choice, the idea for choice is, but choice is always good. Sound Exchange boss Michael Hoops said the AM/FM Act ensures that the people who make the music have a protected property right in their own work by requiring broadcasters to get permission before they transmit recordings over the air. It sets the table for meaningful marketplace negotiations and ends the current market distortion in our laws that forces artists to subsidise the multi-billion-dollar FM radio broadcast industry. Sorry, I made a mistake there. Sound Exchange, not for the Local Radio Freedom Act, they're for the AM/FM Act.
This is just specifically America.
This is specifically
Because
America.
radio here works differently, right?
Yeah, radio over here, artists will always be paid a royalty. I believe it's Radio 2 pays the best at the minute at around maybe £25-30, then Radio 1 slightly lower, all the way until you get down to 6 Music, who pay, I think they've just raised it. They used to be around £4 something about 2 years ago, but I think that has gone up.
So as long as you register with PPL, right?
Yep.
You can get your radio money here in the UK. And why don't America just copy us?
Because
why don't they drive on the right side of the road first and then copy us? Well, and that's 2 problems sorted.
Because then they would have, dumped a load of tea for nothing. Just some closing statements from this story. The National Association of Broadcasters said, "We oppose the AM/FM Act, which could decimate the economics of America's hometown radio stations that have launched the careers of countless musicians and exposed legacy artists to a new generation of listeners." The industry group added that its doors remain open to work with the record labels to find a holistic solution to this issue that reflects the enduring value to artists and labels of local radio to our hundreds of millions of terrestrial and digital listeners. Unfortunately, the record labels have shown little interest in having those discussions. Meaning, labels, have a chat.
Nothing. Have you learnt nothing? The last 20 years, last 30, 40 years, right?
Yeah.
This has been terrible for you guys.
I reckon it's because they're scared at the minute, and when you're scared, it's harder to take a risk because there's a lot going on that could completely cripple a label. But in this sense, it seems like people are only set to gain, labels included. If more people are getting remittance for stuff, just sit down with each other, have a nice chat, cup of tea, just hash it out. Just hash it out, guys. So anyway, we're coming up to time now. We just want to thank you all so much for listening. Thanks to Pete Smith for appearing on here. Thanks to all the fabulous artists we've mentioned and others we haven't for all their work. Fletcher, would you like to say any closing statements?
I just wanted to thank the Fat Bottom Girls because you make the rockin' world go round.
Thank you, Fat Bottom Girls. Anyway, have a fantastic evening, ladies and